statue to Thomas Alva Edison. Okay, so this is the Thomas Edison Depot Museum. Isn't that cool? Dogs are like, I don't know, Mom. Don't think you guys can go in. People first crossed the St. Clair River using logs, rafts, and canoes. I wouldn't want to get across that current on those things. Steam-powered ferries began carrying freight and people in the 1840s. The river current pushed tethered swing ferries from shore to shore. Later, other ferries were used, and in 1891, rail transport was improved with the opening of the tunnel under the St. Clair River. In 1938, the Blue Water Bridge made automobile and truck traffic possible across the international border. A second span was built in 1997 to accommodate increasing traffic. The longest span of the Blue Water Bridge is approximately 1.25 miles long, and the highest point is 233 feet above the water. Clair has always been an important part of the Great Lakes system. For centuries, native people traveled throughout the region in canoes, as did early French fur traders. In 1679, La Salle's Griffin was the first sailing ship to pass here. Father Louis Hennepin, the renowned explorer and priest on board that ship, named the river after St. Clair. The river's swift currents and other hazards have caused many shipwrecks through the years. During the 19th and 20th centuries, ships and pleasure boats were built in yards along the St. Clair River from Port Huron south to Algonac. Wooden sailing ships were eventually replaced by steel freighters powered by steam and diesel. During the shipping season, freighters continue to pass here daily, bound for Chicago or Duluth in one direction, or for the Atlantic Ocean and cities all over the world in the other. Grand Trunk Railroad Depot to the right is where 12-year-old Thomas Edison departed daily on the Port Huron Detroit run. In 1859, the railroad's first year of operation, Tom persuaded the company to let him sell newspapers and confections on the daily trips. He became so successful that he soon placed 2 newsboys on other Grand Trunk runs to Detroit. He made enough money to support himself and to buy chemicals and other experimental materials. So there you go. Many people coming to the United States from other lands entered through this depot. By 1881, more than 77,000 immigrants first stepped foot on American soil here. Port Huron folks gathered here to see and hear the new arrivals, fascinated by their different clothes and foreign speech. Young Thomas Edison is said to have peddled his candy and fresh vegetables here to townspeople and foreigners alike. The immigrants were taken to nearby Fort Gratiot, where they were disinfected, served meals of bread and soup, and temporarily housed in long sheds. Some of the immigrants settled in the Port Huron area, while others continued on to build new lives in America's young cities, farmlands, and western frontier. Fort Gratiot was built by the U.S. Army in 1814 to guard the strategic junction of Lake Huron and the St. Clair River. Troops stood ready to defend Michigan and the U.S. against British forces in Canada. As settlement moved westward, the fort was a stopping point for soldiers and supplies headed for the frontier. During the Civil War, area soldiers prepared for battle here, but Fort Gratiot never suffered a hostile attack. In 1879, the American flag was lowered and the fort was abandoned. What? See, I'm just tired. Thomas Alva Edison was 7 years old in 1854 when he and his family moved to Port Huron. They moved into a house on the Fort Gratiot military reservation a short distance south of here. This is where young Al conducted his first experiments in chemistry and electricity. He left Port Huron in 1863 and his family moved out of the house in 1865. 5 years later, it was destroyed by fire. Railroad tracks laid on the site protected Edison family artifacts still buried there. When archaeologists excavated this area 100 years later, we learned more about the young inventor's life. The Underground Railroad, for those of you that don't know, prior to the Civil War, African American slaves, in brave and desperate attempts to flee from slave owners in the southern states, passed through Port Huron via the Underground Railroad. It was not a real railroad, but a system of routes where people opposed to slavery would provide escaping slaves with food, clothing, shelter, and encouragement. Sympathetic people hid the escapees in houses and barns by day and then guided them to the next safe station at night. Many escaped slaves traveled northward to Michigan and in their pursuit of freedom. Some stayed in the state, others continued their flight into Canada, crossing at Port Huron or other places along the waterway. Isn't that cool, guys? There's a cool little museum here. I don't know if we should be walking on train tracks, Fifi. Come on. Good girl. We don't play on train tracks, guys. You never know.